So we just finished a discussion analyzing primary documents in India and the British Raj in India, um, both both positive and negative views on British imperialism in India. We now want to turn our attention to the United States and do it briefly because you will be taking U.S. history next year and focus more on this. But we also want to note that the United States is an imperialistic power, especially in Latin America in the 19th and 20th centuries. And we want to start with the Spanish-American War here in 1898. And it starts with circumstances that are very much questioned by historians. A U.S. naval ship, the USS Maine, there's an explosion aboard it here in Havana, and U.S. Navy personnel die. And the U.S. blames the Spanish and justifies the start of the Spanish-American War. Historians believe it was not, the Spanish had nothing to do with this explosion. Nonetheless, the United States takes advantage of this war and basically is going to defeat the Spanish very, very quickly and really make Cuba a protectorate, take Puerto Rico outright. But what I want to focus on are the Philippine Islands, the Philippines, part of Southeast Asia. You can see, though, very, very close proximity to China, Hong Kong. This is southern China right here in East Asia. And the United States, interestingly, in my humble opinion, started looking away in the 19th century from Europe and realizing that the United States' future and economic future had more probably interest in East Asia than Europe, and really turned its attention to East Asia. So the Spanish possessed the Philippines, but you can see the close proximity to China and trade with China. And the United States will continue its efforts in the Spanish and American War here and defeat Spanish naval forces. There was a Filipino freedom fighter, his name Emilio Aguinaldo, and he had tried to liberate the Philippines from the Spanish and was unsuccessful, and was optimistic that when the United States defeated the Spanish that they would give the Philippines autonomy and independence. And Aguinaldo was excited about this and thought that the U.S., which lauded democratic values and freedoms and independence, again, would make the Philippines free and give them autonomy and sovereignty over their own affairs. That was not the case. And so there is a war that breaks out in the Philippines between the U.S. and Filipino freedom fighters trying to liberate the Philippines. The cost is high. 200,000 Filipinos will die fighting the U.S. 5,000 American forces. So you can see the dramatic ratio of mortality between the Filipino forces and the U.S. forces. So the United States was also engaged in these imperialistic acts and wars. And they gain now an advantage with trade in China and Japan and Korea and East Asia. We want to focus, though, our attention today on the scramble for Africa. So, scramble for Africa. As you can see, Europe didn't control much African territory prior to the 1870s, really. You can see there is some European territory and colonies in Africa, but for the most part, Africa, much territory in Africa is independent from Europe. We want to note that in 1808, the British stopped their part in the transatlantic slave trade. Abolitionists had been an important political force that lobbied abolitionists against slavery, both in the US and in Europe and Great Britain. So that is going to end in 1808. But Britain is not going to end slavery until the 1830s and its colonies. But they will set up naval ships off the coast of Africa because there still is a slave trade going on. And if they do, the Dutch, the Portuguese were still transporting slaves to the Americas. And the British Navy would stop these ships and take the people on them if it was British to Sierra Leone. So Sierra Leone was a territory for recaptives. So basically the British would take these Portuguese and Dutch slaves and take them to Sierra Leone, which was a recaptive colony where they would have their freedom. There's a similar site, Liberia, both in West Africa. After the Civil War, freed American slaves would go to Liberia and find refuge there from the U.S. South. So my point again is that I think it's a misnomer to think that Africa had always been under European control. Okay, it's not until the 1880s really that territory is taken by Europeans in Africa. And for what reason? Remember, economics is such a important force that motivates, drives a lot of history. So economics and goods. And what kind of goods? Palm oil. Why palm oil? This lubricant. Because this was simultaneous to the Industrial Revolution, the late Industrial Revolution, and it was a lubricant for machines. Another valuable resource for export was rubber. Again, automobiles becoming more powerful, more important. So rubber, palm oil, peanuts. So Africa was seen as valuable for those goods. We're going to see diamonds down here, gold in South Africa. So more control, and the Europeans start actually battling with one another over territory. And Otto von Bismarck, German, is going to, in 1884, this is something that we should write down, 1885, create the Berlin Conference in Germany and say, why are we battling with one another? Berlin Conference. Let's divide up Africa among ourselves peacefully. So that's what Europe does. Are there any African representatives at the Berlin Conference? No, there are not. I do want to note, too, that there are successful efforts in fighting the Europeans in Ethiopia. Menelik II is going to defeat the Italians at the Battle of Ottawa. So Menelik had been stockpiling machine guns, and Ethiopia was able to successfully, you can see Ethiopia here, retain its independence until the 1930s and Mussolini. But that was a battle for independence against Sierra Leone, Liberia. A little bit more independent, but you can see the British possess a lot of Africa. And again, that Cecil Rhodes political cartoon, okay, where he wants an uninterrupted line for British imperialism in Africa. Let's turn our attention to a couple more places. I want to look at the Belgian Congo, which is one of the last places, and King Leopold II that is taken. Please write down King Leopold II of Belgium. He's an awful human being who wants power. He really has no political power in Belgium, but he convinces the government that they should also be part of the scramble for Africa. And they do discover that one of the last places still that hasn't been colonized in Africa, the Congo here, has rubber. And King Leopold II will make a fortune and become one of the wealthiest people in the world, but the costs are high. The Belgians are brutal in the Belgian Congo. There are quotas for rubber. And if you do not achieve your quota for taking rubber, then your hand is severed by the Belgians. This is an image of imperialism. So in the end, 2 to 3 million Congolese will die. Some historians consider it the first genocide in the Belgian Congo. The Germans too, in Namibia here, have concentration camps. So we think of concentration camps as a World War II. The Nazis, they actually have them in Namibia. The British, where we're going to look at a war here in a second, the South African War, will have concentration camps. German doctors will do brutal human experiments on those that are in the concentration camps. So let's turn our attention to the British here in South Africa. It was Dutch. The Dutch are the first Europeans that are going to take Cape Town down here, but then the British are going to take it. And the Dutch descendants living in South Africa are termed Boer or Afrikaner. And in the 1830s, they're going to move out of South Africa more to the interior. And they have large pieces of land. And they do not treat Africans well. Actually, the British will show more favor to Africans living here than the Boers who had been living here for generations. And war is going to break out because the British increasingly come to the interior where the Afrikaner/Boers are living because of diamonds and gold. And in 1899, the South African War breaks out. South African War over diamonds and gold again. And the Afrikaners know the territory. They've been living there for a long time and put up a very significant resistance. But then the British will send 600,000 troops to South Africa and take South Africa. So South Africa becomes part of the British Empire. The De Beers Company that is associated with diamonds will become more involved. One of the important British officials, Arthur Rhodes, is going to take a lot of control. We're going to have Northern and Southern Rhodesia named after him over here on the southeastern coast. So again, the British, with technology, are going to be successful here. There's a battle in the Sudan over here, the Battle of Omdurman, and the British use of machine gun is going to kill thousands and thousands of Sudanese in this war, when only scores of British soldiers will be killed. It's similar to the U.S. that technological advantage in war is going to lead to mass casualties of people trying to fight for their homeland. I do want to talk about South Africa too. There was a movement called the Xhosa cattle killing movement. Cattle were valuable in South Africa too, and the Xhosa tribe believed this woman who had a dream and said, if we kill all of our cattle, the British will leave. That was her vision from God. And so they start massacring their cattle, and they starve and disease becomes rampant. So these times we see desperate measures and thought